Shadows in the Forgotten Woods. Aristica sensed a new attack coming. The first scream tore through the night like a blade through silence. It wasn't human. At least, not entirely. Rachel froze mid-step, her flashlight trembling in her hand. The beam flickered weakly, barely piercing the thick, suffocating darkness of the woods. She turned to her brother, Jake, whose wide eyes mirrored her terror. Sometime weeks before, someone whose shape... "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind whispering through the skeletal branches. "It's probably just the wind," Jake replied, though his voice betrayed a quaver of doubt. The siblings had no business being in the Forgotten Woods. Every local in their small town of Hollow Creek knew the stories, the ones about people who wandered in and never came out. But Rachel and Jake weren't here by choice. Their car had broken down miles from the nearest town, and the woods were a shortcut to the highway. Or so they'd thought. Another sound, this time closer, made Rachel's heart slam against her ribs. It was a low, guttural growl, followed by the unmistakable sound of something large moving through the underbrush. "Land," whispered Hall close to her ear. "Stay alive, find the council, and report on everything we find." "Jake," Rachel hissed, "we need to go. Now." "Wait," Jake said, raising a hand to quiet her. He swept his flashlight in the direction of the noise. The beam landed on a gnarled tree trunk and the dense, shadowy foliage behind it. Nothing moved. The noise sounded, a tree whispering in the wind. Nothing moved. "See," he said, forcing a laugh. "There's nothing," she said. Since that... Before he could finish, something lunged from the shadows. It moved too fast to be seen clearly, but its outline was grotesque. A tangle of limbs and claws, its eyes glowing with a sickly green light. Rachel screamed as the thing dragged Jake into the darkness. "Rachel, run!" he shouted, his voice fading as he was pulled deeper into the woods. Terror paralyzed her for a moment, but then adrenaline took over. She turned and ran blindly, the flashlight's beam bouncing erratically. The woods seemed alive around her, branches clawing at her clothes, roots snaking up to trip her. Behind her, she could hear the creature's raspy breaths and the crunch of leaves under its weight. She burst into a clearing and fell to her knees, gasping for air. Her flashlight rolled out of her hand and stopped at the base of an old moss-covered well. The well seemed ancient, its stones slick with moss and decay. A faint, guttural whisper emanated from its depths, sending shivers down her spine. "Jake?" she called, her voice trembling. The whisper grew louder, and Rachel felt an inexplicable pull toward the well. Against her better judgment, she crawled closer and peered over the edge. The darkness inside was impenetrable, but she could feel it staring back at her. Then, a voice, Jake's voice, echoed up from the docks. "Rachel, help me, please." Her heart clenched. "Jake?" "It's me," the voice replied. "I'm hurt. Pull me up." She hesitated, her hand trembling as she reached for the rope tied to the well. But something felt wrong. The voice was off, like a distorted recording of Jake's real voice. "Why aren't you helping me, Rachel?" the voice demanded, harsher now. "Where are you?" she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. The whisper from the well became a cacophony of voices. Men, women, children, all screaming, crying, and laughing maniacally. Rachel stumbled back, clutching her ears. Then the creature emerged from the shadows again, its twisted form illuminated by the pale moonlight. "You can't leave," it growled, its voice a guttural snarl. Rachel scrambled to her feet and ran, the creature's footsteps thundering behind her. Just as she thought she couldn't run any farther, she tripped over a root and fell face first into the dirt. When she looked up, she saw an old cabin, its windows glowing faintly. "Consiglio Petai. There's simply nowhere else to go now." Desperate, she crawled to the door and banged on it with all her strength. "Help me. Please, let me in." A loud scratching sound spoke of the door handle. "Help me. Please, let me in." The door creaked open, revealing an old man with deep-set eyes and a face lined with age. He looked at her with a mix of pity and fear. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "Please, something took my brother," Rachel cried. The old man's face darkened. "If it's got him, there's nothing you can do. But you might still have a chance. Come in." The creature's knowing voice comes at Stan first, berating him with their eyes. Rachel hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. The creature was gone, but she could feel its presence lurking in the shadows. With no other choice, she stepped inside the cabin. The door slammed shut behind her, and the old man bolted it with trembling hands. "What is that thing?" Rachel demanded. The old man sighed heavily. Rachel's blood ran cold. "How do I stop it?" she asked. The old man shook his head. "You don't. You survive, if you're lucky." A loud thud against the cabin wall made them both jump. The old man grabbed a shotgun from the corner and gestured for Rachel to stay quiet. The thud came again, followed by the sound of claws scraping against wood. They imagined themselves as higher creatures, and we better get rid of it. I'm tired of living in this realm. "It knows you're here," the old man whispered. "It knows you're here," the old man whispered. "It won't stop until it gets what it wants." Rachel's breath caught in her throat. "What does it want?" The old man didn't answer. Instead, he raised the shotgun and aimed it at the door, his hands steady despite his age. The thuds grew louder, more insistent, until the entire cabin shook. Then, silence. "Is it gone?" Rachel whispered. The old man shook his head. "No, it's waiting." From the darkness outside, Jake's voice called out, "Rachel, are you in there? Please, help me." Her heart leaped, but the old man grabbed her arm. "That's not your brother," he said firmly. "Don't open that door." When he awoke, Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "But what if it is?" "You have to trust me," the old man said. "If you open that door, you'll both be lost." The voice outside grew more desperate. "Rachel, please. It's coming back. Let me in." Rachel's hand hovered over the lock, torn between hope and fear. "What do I do?" she whispered, looking at the old man. His face was grim, but he glanced away. He didn't reply. His face was grim, his eyes fixed on the door as though he could see the terror lurking just beyond it. The stranger sighed heavily. "Ain't so bad." Whispers of the Abyss. Dog Puppies. Written by David Stammen. The silence inside the cabin was suffocating, broken only by the erratic rhythm of Rachel's breathing. Outside, Jake's voice continued to plead, each word laced with a desperation that twisted her heart. "Hell, yes. Condemnation, no. Who is this then?" "Rachel," he cried, "please don't leave me out here. I'm your brother. I need you." "Sounds just like him," Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible. "What if it is?" The old man lowered the shotgun and turned to her, his expression grave. Rachel's eyes darted between the door and the old man. Her mind raced, torn between logic and emotion. The voice outside was so convincing, so heartbreakingly familiar. She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms as tears streamed down her face. "Rachel," Jake's voice called again, quieter this time. "I'm hurt. I don't have much time. Please, sis, don't let me die out here." She bit her lip, her body trembling. "I can't just let him." The old man grabbed her shoulders, his grip firm, but not unkind. "If you open that door, you won't be saving him. You'll be condemning yourself. Trust me, I've seen what happens to those who fall for its tricks." The survivors lifted Marcus to his feet. Before Rachel could respond, the creature's voice changed. It was no longer Jake's voice, but a guttural, monstrous growl. "You can't hide forever," it snarled. "Open the door, Rachel. Let me in." Rachel recoiled, her hand dropping from the lock. The old man's expression hardened, and he motioned for her to step back. "Stay behind me," he ordered, raising the shotgun again. The cabin shook violently as the creature slammed against the walls. The sound of claws scraping against the wood filled the air, accompanied by an otherworldly howl that made Rachel's skin crawl. She pressed her hands to her ears, trying to block out the noise. "How do we stop it?" she yelled over the chaos. The old man shook his head, his eyes never leaving the door. "You don't. You endure, and pray it gives up." The creature's attacks grew more frenzied, the walls groaning under the strain. Rachel's fear threatened to overwhelm her, but she forced herself to focus. There had to be a way out of this, a way to survive. As if sensing her resolve, the creature let out a bone-chilling laugh. "You can't escape me," it taunted. "I'll find a way in. I always do." Rachel's gaze fell on a trapdoor in the corner of the room, partially hidden under a tattered rug. She pointed to it, her voice trembling. "What's down there?" The old man followed her gaze and hesitated. "The cellar," he said. "It's not safe, but it might buy us time." Without waiting for his approval, Rachel rushed to the trapdoor and pulled it open. The air that wafted up was cold and damp, carrying the faint scent of decay. She looked back at the old man. "Are you coming?" "Just a minute," Owen said. Macy nodded hurriedly and put down the cap of her ski, already placing the surgery on. He hesitated, his expression conflicted. But another violent slam against the door made the decision for him. "Go," he said, motioning for her to climb down. "I'll hold it off as long as I can." "No," Rachel protested. "You'll die." "Better me than you," he said, his voice resolute. "Now go." Tears streaming down her face, Rachel descended into the cellar, the old man slamming the trapdoor shut behind her. She heard the bolts slide into place, followed by the deafening roar of the creature as it finally breached the cabin. In the darkness of the cellar, Rachel pressed her back against the cold stone wall and listened. Above her, the sounds of struggle grew louder, the old man shouting, the creature's guttural growls, the crash of furniture breaking, and then silence. Rachel held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. The trapdoor creaked open, and a shadow fell across the steps.